Now cleans. So cleans, very easy to make a mistake on, right? The biggest misconception about a kettlebell clean is that it's a flip, right? That's where a lot of the stigma happens because the kettlebells flip and they smack on the back of your wrist and you're like, this is very uncomfortable. I don't like it. So one thing that we say is it's not a flip, it is a spin, right? I would say spin to win. Okay, so spinning the kettlebell to the back of the wrist is always going to be a lot easier, a lot more longevity in the wrist, and it's just going to feel more comfortable. Okay, now there's two ways we can approach it. We teach it like this just because it takes the backswing element out of it, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a vertical pull. So we keep it from this dead position. We call it the dead clean. Now, first thing I like to do is I like to generate torque in my arm, right? So I'll take my thumb and I'll twist it back. So now there's torque built up. So if he were to release it, his arm is naturally going to want to unwind. So it just helps with the spin. Now, he wants to, one, fire the hips, and he also wants to pull at the exact same time. A lot of times we see a kettlebell clean where the hips finish first and then they try to like muscle it up right afterwards. And it just turns into an awkward curl. Okay. Now, what he wants to do is he wants to pull early. Now, he's going to pull as hard as the kettlebell needs to be pulled. So for Zane, a 16 kilo clean, he doesn't need to pull at 100%, right? He needs to pull only as much as he needs to get the kettlebell up. So for him, this is probably like a 40 to 50% pull, right? Now, for someone else, it might be different, right? A 16 kilo, you might have to really pull to get it up. Now, one of the things that he's doing is he's pulling it in close proximity to his body. One cue that I use in class, a lot of you guys have probably heard, is like we're in a shoulder-to-shoulder party, right? We're back in college or we're at a concert, right? And everyone's in front of you and you're trying to get this kettlebell up without swinging it out. Do a swing out clean. Couple things. One, that's only going to emphasize the flip more. And then notice how it's like shoving him in his shoulder, right? When it cleans and it nestles on the back of the wrist and shoulder, it should be natural, right? It should be effortless. Okay. So one cue that we use a lot is zip the coat, right? When you zip the coat, naturally how you would zip the coat is you turn your wrist, starting the spin, and you tuck your elbow underneath, right? Now, sometimes people have, like, even with this cue, as good as the cue is, right? Sometimes people will still flip the kettlebell. They'll pull it close and they'll still flip. This is where I really emphasize turning the thumb out, almost like you're trying to hitchhike, right? So if you still have an issue, like you're zipping your coach, I'm zipping the coat, but it's still flipping, right? So I want you to think, so big thing here is watch his thumb as he goes to do like a slow version of it. His thumb's going to turn out. So I really want, people when they're still flipping with the zip the coat cue is to think about you're turning your thumb out like you're trying to hitchhike, right? Then it spins, he tucks his elbow underneath, and now we're in that clean position, right? Emphasizing again, elbow tucked to the rib cage, vertical forearm, neutral wrist. So keeping the kettlebell close to you, right, on the pull, pulling at the same time. You want your hips and your upper body pull to work in conjunction. Does that make sense? Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah. Think about trying to use violent hips and elbows. Once you get heavy, you have to be explosive, just like a swing. So you have to pull up high and tight and think about like catching an egg. You want to soften that blow. So that's why you'll see a lot of people do their clean here and it doesn't start here. So do one where you kind of finish higher. And he can pull that off. He's strong enough where he has a smart grip that he slowed it down with his grip. Do one a little more violent for me. Yeah. So don't do that, right? You want to start a little lower. So show them when you started about the wolf head or a little earlier. Belly button almost, right? Yep. So it rolls right into that. It nestles, as he said.
Getting it down, right? Next thing, right? So if we're not careful with this, it just turns into a flip down, which again, you're going to get that external feedback of the yank, right? We don't want it to yank us down. So if I'm here, I think of, again, turn the elbow or turn the hand out to get it up. Also turn the hand out to get it down. So I turn the hand out. I start to let it fall. Once it releases from the back of my wrist, I can then turn it back in to have it come back down, right? So if I'm here, turn out, and it twists back down and it doesn't yank.
Notice his elbow stay pretty tight.
Yep, so here, again, elbow stays tight, turn back down. Just like you would getting it up, you're in a crowded room, getting it down the same way, right? Now, if you were to do it from a swing position, right? So a lot of times people want to start from the swing position. So one thing that Zane needs to do, because it's not an arc style, it's not a swing, so we don't want to arc it away from us. So what Zane's going to do is he's going to slightly change his hip position to make it a vertical pull. Okay, so bring it back down. So I'll start from the beginning and go from the side, so people can see the hip drop. It's okay. So if you were just to swing it here and just do a single arm swing, right? The bells wants to arc away. So what I want you guys to see is the subtle hip shift to then be able to pull it vertically. So go ahead and do one. Notice how his hips shifted a little bit underneath so then he could pull it more vertical, right? Because that's usually the biggest problem, which is why we teach the dead clean more here. It's just easier barrier. Not, again, a lot of what we teach is just an easier barrier of entry, right? We can go and do these swing cleans. It's just easier to get the movement across and have you guys get into doing cleans right away. So whenever we think about starting from the hike position, we hike it back. Naturally, it's going to want to swing away, so we have to change the hip angle to then pull it up vertically. The lighter the kettlebell, the easier it is, but if you go to a more working weight where you're going to be, okay, I really have to pull on this, and the swing has to be harder, that's where you're really going to want to change the angle of the hips.
Do you have a cue for when it goes down in between the hips? For wrist rotation at all?
The big thing is once it leaves the wrist. Like everyone thinks like, how do I release it? How do I twist it? Right? It's just because it's still connected to the wrist. So once it gets to the point where it leaves your wrist, right? So here, turn out. Once it leaves your wrist, you can then spin it however you need, right? It's just when it hasn't left the wrist, people are like, well, how am I supposed to spin it, right? It has to leave the wrist to then be able to spin.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a cue that I'll never forget is when you're going down, the thumb goes up there, and then you can bring it back up because it gives you that natural rotation, right? Obviously, you don't want to over rotate. That's what happens if you get too low in the triangle. But thumb up high up there, and then pull back in. Okay.
One of the reasons we spin in also is we can get the elbow stuck into our hip crease and it can eventually hyperextend our elbow. It's very uncommon, right? But there's a reason why we spin it in, because we can then bend the elbow naturally that way as well. So, any questions on the clean before we get into the next one? Nice.
Sweet. All right, so we'll go over our squats. So just 2 squat variations for now, goblet and our front rack squat. So with our goblet squat, we have different ways of holding it. There's no right or wrong way if your wrists like it a certain way. So this is more of like a crush grip. So this can help you kind of keep those neutral positions, ensure that you're keeping your chest and lats involved. And then as he goes into his squat, yeah, so many variations here. Yeah, I like it. So if he goes into a squat, it's going to force him to stay a little more upright. So as he goes down, he starts with the knees, and then he involves the glutes and hips, and he comes back up nice and vertical. So it may be a little more of a quad dominant squat when you're doing a goblet squat. And then another variation of his grip, if you want to go to like where the handle's in the palm and the index fingers, 2 hands, but fingers like on the handles like this. Yeah, I do.
Just
so. So I tend to do this one for some clients. It helps helps them engage their lats and chest as well. Index fingers on. It's another way to keep it neutral. I know sometimes this can be a little intense as far as the biceps too. So this can be another variation to try. Some people are different. Some people prefer something else, but I like both of those that we just showed.
So technically it's a goblet front squat because the weight's obviously in the front, so you're going to get more quad dominant where the weight is located, right? And since obviously we can't do like a kettlebell back squat, right? These squats are always going to be more quad dominant, right?
And a little lighter.
Exactly. As opposed to like a barbell, you could position the barbell lower on your back, and that's going to force it to be more of a low bar back squat to be more hinge. Okay, the front rack squat. Now, again, strong front rack position. Elbow's going to be tight. Vertical forearm, neutral wrist. Now, he can have his hand. Now, this is like a me thing. Like I can't speak for the other coaches, but as soon as that hand goes on the hip, just kill me, right? Right? So passionate about it because it happens a lot. Happens a lot.
Yeah, no sassy squats.
So, like a great thing to do is just match what the other arm is doing, right? So Zane could easily just go here, pretend he has another kettlebell, and boom. Now, again, starting with the knees, one thing that I like to start with the knees for is to really remind where the movement is actually targeting, right? If I were to say sit your butt back, what's he going to do? He's going to sit it back, boom, hinge, right? Not targeting what we want. Also puts a lot of tension on the back. So if you were to start with his knees first, right? Now the back's more upright, less tension involved. Hips staying lower than the knees, right? And then we can have these elbows inside the knees to just kind of remind ourselves that our knees need to be in line with the toes. Now, valgus knee collapse, isn't 100% terrible, right? Some of it is okay. Like excessive and chronic valgus collapse, probably not a good thing. So we always say knee over toe, right? And if you can pry the knees open if that helps keep the knees in line with the toes. Okay. So the big thing here is keeping the elbow tight. A lot of times, especially when the weight gets heavy, people will then want to tuck the elbow out, right? The fatigue happens in the elbow or in the shoulder rather, right? So making sure that we're staying tight, keeping the elbows like not necessarily by the rib cage. They can be in front a little bit as long as the lats are engaged, right? So like the heavier the kettlebell, the more you're going to have to bring it out in front, right? To be able to hold the weight, right? Because the bigger the bell, the more it's going to pull you forward.
Yeah, we talk about the lats a lot because they run from your hip all the way up, right? So utilize those to stabilize the shoulder, helps you stay safe, not shrugging. If you shrug and you feel the traps tighten up, that means your lats are probably loose. So try to pack them down as much as you can.
A cue that we use a lot just in general is your ear is shoulder poison. Anytime you're doing any type of movement and the shrug and like the shrug isn't the movement involved, right? It's probably not good for you. Okay. So think ears are shoulder poison, whether it's here or especially any type of overhead movement, right? It's a good way to tweak like your rotator cuffs and your small stabilizing muscles in the shoulder.
All right. Yeah, please. Yeah, so I mean, you can dive in if you want, but I actually always do that because it ensures my depth, right? So when I'm going down, I get to use that as a measurement to make sure I'm just getting into my range. And I know everyone doesn't have the same depth as everyone else, right? But if I don't do that, I'm just stopping here and I use it as like a measurement of my depth, but you're actually limiting yourself. So avoiding this, I like to get here. It ensures that your glutes are more involved as you drive the hips apart on the way up and down.
Yeah, if widening your stance allows you to get more range of motion, right? 2 thumbs up there. Narrow is going to be just more quad dominant.
Yeah. So like if there's heel elevated, narrow, you can almost say if you are going narrow goblet squat, if you drive out a little bit, you're still able to get inside, right? So that's ideal. It gives you more height to get more depth as well? It's a great question.
Obviously, like, you know, and this is something that Zane always brings up when we say drive out, like it's like ripping the floor apart with your feet. It's not so much driving out to where now all of a sudden our foot platform is being compromised. Okay. Good
Nice.
questions. Great
Yeah,
questions.
let's practice just a couple squats. You guys don't mind, ready? Great.
Oh, squats.
Practice the different variations a little bit, even if you're not squatting. Maybe just hold